I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I just stood there in the middle of my mother's kitchen, still wearing my hospital ID badge, reading the same 3 sentences over and over until the words stopped making sense. Effective immediately, your position at Aldgate Memorial has been terminated. Your access credentials have been revoked. Please do not return to the premises. It was sent by my supervisor's son, not HR. Not a formal letter. A text message. At 6:47 in the morning, 11 days before my nursing license renewal review. The one I had spent 4 months preparing for. The one that was supposed to finally move me into the senior clinical coordinator role I had been working toward for 6 years. My mother was standing at the stove making eggs. She didn't look up. "What's wrong with your face?" she said. I showed her the screen. She squinted at it for a second, then turned back to the stove. "Maybe you did something to deserve it." I put my phone in my pocket, picked up my bag, and walked out the door. I didn't say goodbye, not because I was being dramatic. I just genuinely had nothing left to say to her. My husband was waiting in the car. He was already running late for a deposition, but he had driven 20 minutes out of his way to pick me up because my car was in the shop. He was like that. Always rearranging things quietly without being asked. I got in. He looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. "Talk," he said. I handed him my phone. He read it twice. Then he handed it back her and said very calmly, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." I looked at him. "That's it, okay?" He smiled. Not a big smile. "Just the corner of this afternoon." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought he was going to call a labor attorney, maybe a union rep. My husband is a corporate litigator. He knows people who know people. I figured he meant we'd look into wrongful termination, file a complaint with the board, maybe get a settlement. I had no idea. Let me back up, because you need to understand what Aldgate Memorial actually was, and what I was to them, before any of the rest of this makes sense. I started at Aldgate 6 years ago as a floor nurse in the cardiac unit. I was 26, fresh out of my master's program, and I had turned down 2 other offers to take this position. Because the clinical coordinator above me, a woman named Dr. Hartley, had a reputation for actually developing her staff, she wasn't wrong. Within 18 months, I had cross-trained in 3 departments, written 2 internal protocol updates that got adopted hospital-wide, and built the kind of relationships with attending physicians that most nurses twice my age hadn't managed. Dr. Hartley retired 14 months ago, and that is when everything changed. Her replacement was not hired from within. He was not hired from outside either, exactly. He was installed. His name was Creighton, and he was the son of the hospital's primary private donor. A man who had given Aldgate something in the range of $40 million over the past decade and sat on the board of directors. Creighton had a business degree from a school I'd never heard of, 0 clinical background, and the particular brand of confidence that belongs exclusively to people who have never once been told no. Within his first week, he called me into his office to tell me that he was restructuring the coordinator pipeline and that my review would be pushed back indefinitely. He said this while playing with a pen, not looking at me. I asked what the timeline looked like. He said he didn't have one. I asked what I could do in the meantime to strengthen my candidacy. He said, and I am quoting this directly because I will never forget it, "Just keep doing what you're doing and we'll see. We'll see." After 6 years. After 3 department commendations. After a protocol I had written saved the hospital from what would have been a catastrophic liability case involving medication documentation. I kept my face neutral, thanked him, and went back to my shift. Over the next 6 months, I watched Creighton promote 2 people into coordinator roles. Both of them had been at Aldgate for less than 3 years. Neither of them had the documentation hours or the specialty certifications I had. One of them was Creighton's former college roommate, which I only found out because someone in HR mentioned it casually in the break room. I filed a formal grievance in December. It went nowhere. The HR director told me, very gently, that these were discretionary decisions, and that the hospital was committed to a culture of growth and opportunity. She looked pained saying it. I don't think she disagreed with me. My husband, when I told him all of this, listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Are you keeping records?" I was. I had been keeping records since week 3 of Creighton's tenure, actually, because something in my gut told me I was going to need them. Emails, meeting notes, timestamps, screenshots of the internal scheduling system showing that I had been passed over for 3 separate coordinator coverage slots in favor of people who were junior to me. I had a folder, on a personal drive, not the hospital system. My husband had suggested that the first week Creighton arrived and I had come home with that look on my face. He is very good at reading situations before they fully develop. The morning I received the termination text, I had been at my mother's because my sister had called a family breakfast, which was her way of gathering people before she delivered news she knew was going to land badly. The news, it turned out, was that she and her husband were buying a house in a gated community 45 minutes away, and she wanted our mother to move in with them. Not with me, with her. I want to be honest about my reaction to that, because it's relevant. My first feeling was relief. My mother and I have a complicated relationship, which is a gentle way of saying that she has spent the majority of my adult life treating my accomplishments like inconveniences, and my sister's considerably more modest ones like miracles. My sister married young, quit her job to raise kids, and lives the kind of life my mother has always considered the correct template for a woman. I went to graduate school, built a career, married a man my mother thinks is too quiet, and have not produced grandchildren yet, which my mother considers a personal slight. So when my sister said the words, "Mom's going to come live with us," I felt my shoulders drop about 2 inches. Then my mother looked at me and said, "I hope you're not going to make this about you." I had not said a word. And then my phone buzzed with the termination text, and I was suddenly dealing with 2 kinds of abandonment before 8 in the morning. Here is what I did not do. I did not call Creighton. I did not go to the hospital to make a scene. I did not post anything on social media. I did not cry, at least not yet. What I did was call my friend Una, who is a labor and employment attorney, and ask her to look over everything I had compiled. I sent her the folder that afternoon. She called me back in 2 hours. "This is not a close case," she said. "How soon can you meet?" We met the next morning. What I had, according to Una, was a documentable pattern of discriminatory treatment, 2 instances that could constitute constructive dismissal building blocks, a termination that violated my contract's 30-day notice clause, and, perhaps most critically, a paper trail showing that the methodology used to evaluate promotions had been applied inconsistently in ways that disadvantaged employees who had filed formal complaints. Which I had, in writing, time-stamped. "What do you want?" Una asked me. I told her I wanted my back pay, my benefits through the end of my contract term, a neutral reference letter, and for my personnel file to be cleared of anything Creighton had added to it in the last 6 months. She nodded slowly. "That's the conservative version. What's the other version?" "The other version involves the board of directors, the state nursing board, and possibly a conversation with the journalist who has been covering Aldgate's donor governance overlap for the last 8 months. I looked at her. "There's a journalist covering this?" "There has been since February. She's been waiting for someone with documentation." I went home and talked to my husband for 3 hours. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, with his hands folded, and listened to everything. When I was done, he said, "You've already paid the price. The only question is whether you want the receipt. I want you to understand that I did not make this decision out of anger. Anger had been there, yes, simmering under everything for months, but by that point it had mostly burned off into something quieter and more certain. I made the decision because I had spent 6 years doing excellent work for an institution that had systematically undervalued me the moment a man with the right last name walked through the door. And I had the documentation to prove it. "Yes," I told my husband, "I want the receipt." Una filed a formal complaint with the State Labor Board on a Thursday. She also sent a letter to Aldgate's Board of Directors, carbon copied to the hospital's general counsel, outlining the claims and the evidence. The letter was 12 pages. I know because she showed it to me before she sent it. The response came faster than either of us expected. Creighton's father, the donor, the board member, the man who had spent 40 years building his name into every wing and corridor of that hospital, called my husband on Saturday morning. Not me. My husband. I was in the next room folding laundry when I heard my husband's voice shift into what I privately call his courtroom register. Even, quiet, completely unyielding. I stopped folding. I stood very still. The call lasted 11 minutes. My husband came into the bedroom, set his phone on the dresser and said, "He wants to meet with you? With both of us." He said, and I am quoting, that he wants to resolve this privately and preserve the relationship. I almost laughed. What relationship? My husband looked at me with that almost smile again. That's what I told him. We met in Una's office, not theirs. That had been non-negotiable. Creighton's father came in person, with 2 attorneys. Creighton was not there, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously his father was taking this. He was older than I expected, silver-haired, well-dressed, with the particular weariness of a man who had spent a long time being the most powerful person in every room and was only now beginning to understand that rooms change. He looked at me when he sat down, not at my husband, not at Una, at me. "I owe you an apology," he said. "My son made decisions that were not reflective of this institution's values, and you were harmed by them." It was a good apology as far as these things go. Practiced, but not entirely empty. I let Una do the talking after that. What followed was 4 hours of negotiation that I will summarize because the details belong to a sealed agreement and not to this story. What I will tell you is that I received everything I had asked Una for in that first meeting, and several things I had not asked for. The independent performance review I had requested, the one that would evaluate whether the promotion decisions made under Creighton's tenure had been applied fairly, was agreed to and would be conducted by an outside firm. Its findings would be reported to the full board. The journalist had her interview. I gave it 3 weeks later with Una present after the settlement was finalized. The story ran the following month. It was not a short piece, and Creighton, the son who had sent me a termination text at 6:47 in the morning like he was canceling a food delivery, resigned from his position 8 days after the story published. The board, I was told, had strongly encouraged him to do so. There are things people expect you to feel at a moment like this, and I want to be honest that what I actually felt was mostly tired. Not unhappy, not ungrateful, just the specific exhaustion of Apams who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. I cried exactly once, about a week after the settlement, standing in my old unit at a hospital I had taken a temporary contract position with while everything was being sorted. One of the nurses I had trained 2 years ago came up to me on her lunch break and said, "We heard what happened. Everyone knows you were right." That was the moment. Not the settlement, not the article, just that. My mother called me the week the story ran. She had seen it or someone had shown it to her, she said. I didn't know it was that serious. I told her I knew. She said, "You could have told me." I thought about that for a long moment, about the kitchen and the eggs, and maybe you did something to deserve it. "I did tell you," I said. "You just weren't listening." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Your sister says you should come for dinner." I told her I'd think about it. I haven't decided yet. Some things take longer to sort out than a 12-page complaint letter and a 4-hour mediation. Some things you carry in a different folder and you have to figure out on your own terms what to do with them. What I know is this. I documented everything. I found the right people. I waited for the right moment. And when that moment came, I didn't flinch. There is a senior clinical coordinator role at the hospital where I'm contracted now. The director mentioned it to me last week, over coffee, in the way people mention things when they're actually asking something. I smiled and told her I was very interested. And this time, I am not starting from scratch.